His life was entwined with so many of us who are here. Yet many who are not present, who may not even have known him personally, benefited from his life's work. Len often said that his primary task was to win the freedom of his client. But in addition, he said, I am completely committed to helping my clients maintain their political values and integrity. He was deeply concerned and caring about each individual, client, family, friend, and simultaneously he threw himself into the endless endeavors to make a better world through the broader political work that so many of his cases embodied. My name is Kathy Boudin. I was a friend and client of Len's. He was a colleague of my own father, Leonard, working on the Pentagon Papers case, among others. Len was the central lawyer in my case and remained my lawyer during my years in prison and when I came home until I was recently released from parole. Thank you. When I came home, we began to do work together on parole reform, and we shared a wonderful friendship, including time in the country on his land, where I used to visit him with his family. Tonight, we will hear from family, from best friends, from people whom he defended and shared the never-ending efforts for justice and for peace. Len will emerge as the legal and political giant that he was, as a member of his family, and as a special friend. Later in the program, we will also take a few minutes for those of you who were his clients or whom he helped in other legal endeavors to come up to the stage so that we can be together here. Soon you will have pads and pens passed around to you because we don't have one single book for people to sign into. And if you want to put in your name and your email, we'll be able to be in touch with you about the website that's being set up. 4 of us are hosting the memorial this evening: Scott Franzblau, Michael Smith, Debbie Smith, and myself. We came together with others to care for Len during the last 2.5 months of his life, during this past winter, our winter, his own brittle, bitter winter, in which towards the end, he only wished to smell the spring air as it came into the countryside on his land, and to sit one last time at his desk as the fine lawyer and human being that he was. I think, oh, Lenny, you know why we all love you as we do? Because you practiced with your heart as well as your head. I want to introduce this first speaker, Scott Franzblau, his beloved, beloved nephew.
Thank you, Kathy. On behalf of Len's family, I'd like to thank all of you for coming here tonight. Len's siblings and cousins would describe Len in his early years as thoughtful, if not somewhat mischievous, and certainly adventurous. At Kearney High School, just across the Hudson River, Len was an athlete, a scholar, and was also quite popular with the ladies as well. He was also expelled from school and arrested for sleeping on a beach in Asbury Park. After high school, he hitchhiked coast to coast, and one Memorial Day weekend, he decided to bicycle home from George Washington University to his home in New Jersey. To our surprise, we recently discovered that Len actually saved virtually every letter, and there were many, that he received from family members while in college and in the Air Force, and he actually continued to do so even when he began to develop into, as one journalist put it many years ago, the champion of unpopular causes. Len developed a particularly close relationship with his cousin Irv that lasted throughout his life. When I was a child, Lenny was just my funny uncle who was always traveling abroad. But when he informed me that as an Air Force attorney, he was defending a Russian spy, I knew that he was special. And we soon began to discuss the major issues of our time, and Len opened my eyes to the injustices and inequalities of the world. When I began my graduate studies in microbiology, he immediately suggested that I use microorganisms to try to degrade the Agent Orange in the soils of Vietnam. I eventually went on to pursue drug discovery for neglected infectious diseases in impoverished countries. And although Len and I never discussed that particular path, it was his example of dedicating his life to rectifying inequalities that resonated so strongly as to make this a no-brainer for me. Yes, he was my uncle and my friend, but he was also my role model. And as he was to so many of you here today, he was my hero. Len and I shared a strong connection to nature and a love of dogs. We originally slept in tents on his land up in the Catskills. Then we upgraded to my old teepee, which he left up on his land until the weather finally ripped it to shreds. And then finally to his amazing cabin, which he meticulously designed himself. I loved going up there with him in the country. The long ride up with his dog Luca shedding all over the car. The uncertainty of the car making it up the long gravel and dirt hill. Cutting wood, fixing the trees that the bears inevitably knocked over, his beloved fruit trees. Visiting nearby horse farms, going into Grahamsville for breakfast and to read the New York Times, and then usually concluding with a drive back on Sunday listening to the Giants on the radio. It's much easier than watching them. Weekends just didn't get any better than that. When I went back to Chicago, I always had to make do with telephone updates on the state of his driveway, the orchard, the bets that he and his brother-in-law Joe were placing on the Giants, what country he was off to next, how his latest cases were doing. And each call typically began with a new unsolicited quip by Len about a bad stock tip that I had given him years earlier. He never forgot. As busy as he was, Len was always ready to help out our family members. And I doubt there's a single family member here today that he didn't provide some crucial support at some time in their life. As he aged, he gracefully assumed a more patriarchal role, showing particular interest in the lives of the youngest members. Nonetheless, I don't think that anyone in the family, or probably anybody here today, ever felt that they had sufficient face time with Len. We all wanted more. Len left this world in the same way that he practiced his trade. Faced with as dismal a prognosis as one can imagine, he proclaimed to one of his doctors, "I'm a fighter, I don't go down easy." And he didn't. But this man who gave all he had in defending his clients received in turn that same dedication from family, from friends, and from the doctors, nurses, and attendants at Montefiore Medical Center and at Village Healthcare during those last few weeks. Dr. Sayer in Calcutt, Dr. Cohen, Doyle, Shimami, and Kalbish, the young doctors, Rosner and Osanaga, some of whom are here tonight, I want to acknowledge them. They often cared for Len like he was a personal family member, and our family is forever grateful for their efforts. I believe that Len's relentless fight against this disease was largely motivated by his belief that he had much work to be done. Len used to jot down little phrases on small pieces of paper, and Debbie recently found one of these, and it read, "Only those who choose to fight live beyond irrelevance." Len certainly was one who fought his entire life. And although we couldn't extend Len's life beyond a couple of months after his diagnosis, we can ensure that his work continues to live on by establishing a legacy fund in his name. And so to that end, we're setting up a website, leonardweinglass.org. It's on the last page, page 18 of your program. I encourage you to visit there. I encourage you to contribute your ideas. All the slides you've seen today will be up there, the videos, tributes, and it's a place that we can have live on in Len's name. Thank you.
My name is Debbie Smith, and I had the honor and the good fortune to have Len as a friend. Sorry, I'll start again. Is that better? Okay. My name is Debbie Smith, and I have had the honor and the good fortune to have Len as a friend. Tonight I'll be introducing three men who shared a friendship with Len for more than 40 years. Marty Garbus, an attorney and author, John Tito Gerasi, an author and professor, and Bob Bloom, an attorney. Marty?
Lenny was good, sweet, kind, committed. When I met him 40 years ago, he was the best trial lawyer of his generation. And he continued to be that throughout his entire life. He always did his homework. He was meticulous as a lawyer. When he and I traveled together through Vietnam, Cambodia, Cuba, Nicaragua, Europe, his curiosity was always there to learn about the people, and he treated everyone he met with extraordinary dignity. We celebrate his life today. We mourn his death. He was exceptional. There won't be anybody like him for a very, very long time. He died far too young. He had a great deal more work to do. I loved him very, very much. I'd like to read a poem by W.H. Auden with some paraphrasing of mine. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum, bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. Let aeroplanes circle, moaning overhead, scribbling in the sky the message, Lenny is dead. Put great bows round the white necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. Lenny shared my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that Lenny would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pick up the moon, dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood, for less now can come to good. Thank you.
My name's Tito Gerasi. I met Lenny when he was still in Newark Law Commune, but we became friends about 40 years ago. When, to get higher?
Is that better?
I don't know. I can't hear it. When both of us went out to the West Coast, he was already there, and he had gotten a house in Echo Park, which was the Mexican district in Los Angeles. Wonderful place, really wonderful place, but of course the roads weren't any good. The city wasn't keeping up anything. It was, after all, it's the Mexicans, right? But developers had their eyes on it, and when I got out there, he said, I just bought the house next door because a developer wanted to buy it, and the guy who was here was willing to sell it to me at half the price that he would get because he didn't want developers. So it's yours, and just pay the mortgage, which was, I remember very well, $600 a month. Huge house, beautiful house, fantastic view. And Lenny was at that time defending Skyhorse and Mohawk, who were two... Can't hear? Then I should... Can you hear now? Lenny was defending Skyhorse Mohawk, who are two American Indian movement activists who had been charged with killing two FBI agents. And he wasn't getting any money. There was no defense fund. There was nothing. The Methodists were giving him $235 a week. The trial was in Ventura County. He would leave by 7, he was on the road, and not come back until 9 o'clock. And when I found out that he was not getting any money for this fight, I said, listen, this house is worth a hell of a lot more. But he said, no, just pay the mortgage, and he wouldn't take any more money than that. There was a reason why nobody in those days wanted to give money to anybody who was defending FBI agents. America didn't know what they know today, of course, that the biggest crime syndicate in America is the FBI. But at that time, Lenny was broke. He would sometimes borrow $20 for dinner. And when I tried not to have him paid back, he insisted always paid back. And one night he called me and he said, can I come over? And I said, sure. And he came over and he said, I got a problem. You know, I don't have any money and so on. He said, it's very hard. I can't get an investigator. I can't get all sorts of things. And I just got a call from Scientology offering me $1 million retainer if I would take on their case against the FBI. The FBI had raided the Scientology office and taken away the computers and the files and everything without a warrant, right? And they wanted to sue. And I said to Lenny, I said, do it. I mean, for God's sakes, the FBI is a hell of a lot worse than Scientology. But he hesitated, says, yeah, but I don't like Scientology either, and so on. Eventually, he never took it. And but that was Lenny, right? He just wouldn't take things that he didn't want to defend drug addicts or drug dealers. He didn't want to defend mafiosos. He was always very, very strict with himself about his own vision of morality. And I got a first-hand look about morality later when we both came back to New York. We would see each other all the time, and we'd have lunch constantly, and we got into a habit when we were both in New York to call each other around 10:30, after 10:30, when we had both read the papers, and we would compare what was going on and so on. And something that he had me even in his last moments at Montefiore. He signaled me, didn't say anything verbally, but he signaled and he pointed to the New York Times. And I knew what he meant. He said, read it to him. Right? But what happened personally was that he would come out to all my classes and would talk to my students at Queens College. And many of my students are here because they remember how much he moved them and how honorable a man he was. But I also had kind of a task at hand and pointed out to my students what were the things to fight against. And one of them, of course, was the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And I remember one day there was a big demonstration in Toronto against the World Trade Organization and globalization, which Lenny used to call Americanization. And one of my students called me all of a sudden, and she said, I'm sorry to call you, but I don't know anything. I just got arrested, and they're allowing me one phone call. So I'm calling you. What do I do? And I said, relax, I'll have somebody take care of it as soon as I can. And as soon as we hung up, I called Lenny. She had been arrested and stripped and bodily searched and so on, and it was really a terrible deal. And I told Lenny, and Lenny said, I'll get somebody, don't worry. And the next thing I know, he takes a plane and goes up to Toronto and gets her out. That was Lenny, and that was his sense of morality and duty.
As a trial lawyer, I first want to say this is one of the best jury panels I've ever seen. And if only. I also want to say deeply felt genuine thanks, although it's mentioned and you all know about it, it's mentioned in the program, Kathy and Debbie and Michael and Scott and Scott's girlfriend Mel were just absolutely amazing earlier this year. The time they spent, the dedication, the love, and what they provided for Len in his declining days was astounding. And I do thank them so much, as we all should, and we do. There are two people I want to say a special hello to, and I don't even know if they're here. But Gus Reichbach and Ellen Reichbach have had a tragic loss in their family just in the past couple of weeks. And if you're here or if you're not, I want to send my love and wish you the best in this horrible struggle. I'm not going to speak about Len's cases. Other people have and will, and you'll see footage about it. You'll hear people speak about it. And I think Tito just mentioned that the fact that how carefully he chose what cases he would take and wouldn't take. And it was always cases where there was underlying good people doing good things. And that's what he cared about. He, of course, as you can imagine, he paid no attention to whether there was a fee coming or not. Got him in a little bit of trouble from time to time, but for the most part, he would get past that. And that was very important to him, as it should be to any person who regards himself or herself as a progressive person. Although I do have to say, I was actually his client once. I was appointed in the federal court to represent Alan Berkman. And the creepy federal court judge, and I apologize for the redundancy there, I was hoping that would get a laugh. Len tried to the judge decided to stiff me, and as he did, and Len took the case to the Second Circuit, and unfortunately we both failed to consider the importance of the fact that the Second Circuit might just as well be holding court at the stock exchange. So we did not succeed there, but I hold no resentment toward Len for his failure there. What really, I won't talk about his cases, what really was about with me is the personal connection that he and I had. And I was realizing just a couple of days ago, he moved from Los Angeles to New York in 1985. I moved from New York to Berkeley in the same year. Even though we've been friends now we had been friends for 40 years, we never lived in the same city together. So the kind of thing that you do when you're friends and you're in the same city is, hey, Len, what are you doing? Lunch, dinner, coffee, event, whatever. We never did that. I mean, there were times, of course, when we found ourselves for a day or a week in the same city, and we would get together and do those kinds of things. But mostly, we were on the phone, and I don't exaggerate, we were on the phone every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, depending upon what craziness was happening. He truly was, at least for me, what I think of as a moral compass. If I had a question of do this, don't do this, particularly in political areas, I really trusted his judgment and his instincts. So I was thinking what I wanted to say today. There's really nothing can be said that we don't all appreciate and we all know. I miss him terribly. Having been here a couple of 3 months ago when he was going through the process of passing, I got to deal with it, I thought, and for the most part you do. But, you know, every now and then, or more than that, a moment comes where you start to cry. And a little close to that right now, but I miss him. I miss him every day. He's a comrade, a friend, a revolutionary. And in the end, he led an exemplary life. Leonard Weinglass, presente.
Now we're going to see excerpts from an interview conducted by Miguel Alvarez of Cuba and aired on Cuban TV.
It began shortly after I completed my studies at law school, finished my military service, and in the early 60s, I moved into the city of Newark, New Jersey, which then had an organizing project by the Students for Democratic Society, which came to the city of Newark to organize in the African American community. I became a lawyer for the group and then for activists within the community. In 1967, a rebellion occurred in the city of Newark. The National Guard was called in. The city was occupied. 27 people were killed. And I was involved in the legal work resulting from that activity. Then a young African-American man named Ken Gibson announced he would run for the mayor of Newark. He ran, I represented him, and he became the first African-American mayor of the city of Newark. So that's how it all began. That occurred sometime later, actually in 1971. And in that case, which became a major trial, almost 6 months in length, with over 100 witnesses, it involved the question of the relationship of the United States and Vietnam going back over 40 years. The Pentagon had commissioned a study of that history, and 46 volumes were compiled reflecting that 40-year history. Every page of that encyclopedic work was stamped top secret, and only 5 copies were made. One for the president.
For the President of the United States?
Yes. Mm-hmm. One for the Congress. One for the Pentagon. One for the State Department. And one was given to a consulting study organization called the Rand Corporation. These documents were so tightly held that a member of Congress could only read them if accompanied by 2 Marines in the basement of the Capitol building. But one of the advisors and experts to the Rand Corporation was a man named Daniel Ellsberg. And when he read these 46 volumes, and the war was ongoing, the casualties on both sides were mounting, that he would release these volumes to the New York Times. And he did so. And the New York Times began to publish. And for the first time in history, the President of the United States ordered that these newspapers be halted. And the case went to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court approved the continued publication. But the FBI arrested Dan Ellsberg, and he faced very serious charges, 99 years in prison, for giving this study to the New York Times. And he had a co-defendant who assisted him in all of this, also worked at Rand, named Tony Russo. And I became the chief counsel for Tony Russo. And the trial was on the question of whether Ellsberg did the right thing or the wrong thing in violating U.S. laws in turning over this study. And the national attention was focused on this case. And generals testified, admirals testified, presidential advisors testified, Noam Chomsky testified, Howard Zinn testified, Robert Scheer, Tom Hayden, the intellectual left, and the Pentagon was testifying essentially against each other. And just before the case was submitted for a decision to 12 members of the community who were the jury, it was dramatically revealed that the White House had ordered a group who operated from the White House to break into the offices of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist in Los Angeles to obtain information from the psychiatrist's files to be used against Dan Ellsberg in the trial.
Could you tell me why somebody like Howard Zinn, who is an historian, was a witness at this trial?
Yes, Howard's testimony was very interesting. I put him on the stand because we wanted to demonstrate the nature of this history, that it should not have been considered top secret information. And so when Howard took the stand, I showed him one book of the 46 volumes, and I asked him to open to a page. And I asked him, what is on the top of the page? He said, there's a stamp that says top secret. And I said, and what is on the bottom of the page? And he looked at it and he said, there's another stamp, top secret. And then I said, will you read what's in between these two stamps? And he read it, and he turned to the jury and he said, it's my book. And then he explained to the jury that 30,000 copies of his book were then on the newsstands, and everybody could read it. So the point he made was that the government had wrongfully stamped these pages as though they were secrets, when in fact they were not secrets. They were to be kept from the American public.
What happened at the end?
Well, at the end, the case was dismissed just before it was sent to the jury because another very dramatic episode occurred. When the Nixon White House realized that the judge was going to order that the facts of the break-in of the psychiatrist be turned over to the lawyers, the Nixon White House extended an invitation to the judge in the middle of the trial to come to meet with the president, and that the president wanted to make him the head of the FBI. Hoover was retiring. And so they took the judge from the courtroom into the basement of the courthouse, into a limousine. They covered all the windows, and they drove the judge from the courthouse to the president's summer house in southern Florida, where he met with the president, and they made the offer. So several days later, there was a second meeting in a park overlooking the ocean at 7 o'clock in the morning. The judge met on his way to court with Mr. Halderman, who was the president's assistant. And he told them that he did not want to accept the position. But the news found out about it. And it was revealed, and it was spectacular, that the President of the United States, in an effort to influence a judge, met privately with the judge and offered him a high position. Because of that revelation, the case was dismissed. I defended Amy Carter, who was the daughter of President Jimmy Carter, in the 80s. She was a student, and she and 40 other students at the University of Massachusetts seized a building and held the building and refused to give up the building. And so she was arrested with the other 40. This was a protest against the Contra War in Nicaragua. Actually, the CIA was coming to that building to interview students who they wanted to select for CIA employment. The students, in a protest against the war, seized and held the buildings so that the interviews could not take place. She was charged with the crime of trespassing, of entering a building illegally and holding it. And we went to trial. And our defense was that in the charter of the university, a criminal organization is not permitted to come to the school for purposes of recruiting students. So we had to prove in the case that the CIA was a criminal organization. That was our defense. And in the trial, we called Ramsey Clark, who testified about the World Court opinion on the CIA mining of a harbor in Nicaragua. We called Daniel Ellsberg, who testified about the criminal mind.
Ellsberg, the one you mentioned during the Pentagon Papers.
That's right. This was after the Pentagon Papers trial, and he testified about the criminality that was the mental state in the CIA. We called Howard Zinn, who testified about historically young Americans would fight against their own government when it abused authority and when it stood for injustice. He talked about not just the war for independence from colonial Britain, he talked about slavery and the fight to free the slaves, and he talked about the fight for labor rights and the fight for gender equality, and he brought the history right down to that time. And when the trial was over, it was tried to a jury of 12 people from the farming region in Massachusetts, all rural people. They acquitted Amy Carter and her co-defendants on their only defense, which was the CIA is a criminal organization and had no right to come to the school. It was a great victory. It's an honor and a privilege, and it has always been this way for me, to stand with people who have devoted their lives and made a much stronger commitment to justice, to truth, to peace. Lawyers are very privileged. We involve ourselves in a case, and our life goes on, but the people we represent, like the Cuban Five, are held in very difficult circumstances. And so to stand with them, to express their passion and their commitment to justice and peace is a privilege. I feel very honored by this, and it is, I feel I'm a very lucky man. and I hope that I will someday be able to be with them on the day when they walk out of prison.
Of everybody that I know and my friends know, and you heard some of Len's friends, Len had the best stories. I'm Michael Smith. I'm privileged to be the executor of Len's estate. And like the stories that you hear, you can imagine what his files are like. And they were kept meticulously for the 53 years that he practiced law. So along with my friend and Len's friend, Michael Ratner, we've arranged to give those files to Tamiment at NYU, which has an extensive collection of the files of people like Len, and that's really a good home for it. And I announce this because if there's anybody out there that has anything they might want to contribute to this collection, they should come see me. I'd like to just take a moment and recognize Julie Rubin for the good job that she did in helping coordinate and organizing this evening. Our next speaker is Phyllis Bennis, comes to us from Egypt. She works for the Institute for Policy Studies. She's written a number of very fine books and articles, and I'm sure you will be hearing about her report from Egypt. But before she started doing what she's doing, she worked closely with Len for many, many years, doing jury selection advice, doing investigations, and then she got her current job, but she's going to come talk to us about what it was like to work with Len in the old days.
What an extraordinary opportunity for us to celebrate such an extraordinary life. I want to thank Michael and Debbie and Kathy and Julie and Scott and everybody who worked on the event tonight. You know, I don't know how many of you know, but yesterday the US government took an action that I kept thinking, did they know about this? And then I remembered who I was thinking about. They decided, it was announced yesterday, to declassify the Pentagon Papers. 40 years. And now we can read the Pentagon Papers as if it had not been used as a teaching tool all these years. I first met Lenny as a young, almost student. At the time of the Pentagon Papers trial, there was the Pentagon Papers Peace Project running around trying to use the information in the papers to educate people about the war in Vietnam. It was tied to the Indochina Peace Campaign that I was working with. Lenny became sort of my older brother in LA. I used to house sit for him in Echo Park and take care of Kiefer, the dog that was Luca's grand dog, if we can say that. And I went off to South Dakota with the Lawyers Guild to, among other things, work on some of the Native American cases, the AIM cases out of Wounded Knee. And I learned to do jury investigation there. And when I came back, I started working with Lenny on a number of the cases, the Skyhorse Mohawk trial, Bill and Emily Harris's case, the SLA case. And I don't know how many cases of Iranian and Vietnamese and Palestinian student protests in LA where Lenny took up the role of lead counsel, and I was usually sort of the trial wrangler of keeping all the defendants in trying to talk to each other. It wasn't easy in those days. And it was an extraordinary moment. It was a time when trials really were part of the political mobilization of the movements that were sweeping this country and indeed the world. And then I spent 21 years with Lenny as part of the legal team of the Los Angeles 8 Palestinian deportation case. We won after 21 years. It was the longest case in immigration history. In that case, there were a lot of lawyers involved at the beginning. There were 50 or 60 lawyers involved. We talk about wrangling defendants. I had to wrangle lawyers in that period. But after a few years, it was sort of pared down to a small team. And it was an extraordinary group of lawyers who worked on that case, Lenny at the core. In the meantime, I had become a private investigator largely because one day after court, Lenny said to me, "Why don't you get a license so we can get you appointed on these cases and get you some money?" And I remember saying to him, a license as what? And he said, "As a private investigator." And I said, "You can do that?" I thought that was sort of just in the movies. But I went, I got my license, kept my license for 30 years. And I was the investigator on the LA 8 case. That case, for those of you who don't remember it, was very much a throwback to the McCarthy era. This was a case that had very serious constitutional issues about freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, whether non-citizen immigrants would have any rights in this country. Very crucial, complicated legal issues at stake. But the only thing the judge would ask us at the beginning of every trial day in Los Angeles is, "Mr. Weinglass going to be attending this session?" And there was another lawyer, one of the government lawyers early on in the case, who was very upset that there was massive public support for the 8 that came from the Japanese American Citizens League and came from people across the country who said, "We don't care what these people are charged with. This is not how you treat people who have not been convicted of a crime." And there was a day outside the courthouse when one of the government lawyers gave a press conference and he sort of whined, "We didn't expect the Len Weinglasses of the world to be on this case." But we had expected it. We expected it because Lenny always showed up. He always showed up when there was a need, when there was a challenge to justice and there was a need for lawyers. He was there. And that's how so many people remember him. My friend David Cole, who was part of that legal team, was reminding me the other day that Lenny also invented the word terrorologist in that trial when we were cross-examining the government's so-called experts. But with all of the focus on terrorism, it was Mr. Weinglass who the judge was focused on. And it was because we knew that he would always show up. You know, they say history is made by those who show up. Well, in our case and in Lenny's case, movements are built by those who show up. And it was to build a movement that Lenny made these extraordinary decisions, these moral decisions that were fundamentally political. What was going to help build a movement? And that was what Lenny saw his life's work. It was certainly about giving voice to the extraordinary people he represented in these trials. But it was also about building the kind of movement that would make sure that those trials never had to happen again. It was about looking to the future. And Lenny was our most luminous star in all of that. Not always the brightest star on the biggest stage, he left that to others, but because behind the scenes, he was the funniest one with the stories. He was the one who prepared better than anybody else for court the next day. And he led teams. He trained people. He led teams of wannabe Weinglasses and Weinglasses in training and junior Weinglasses. And all of us who he trained became better lawyers and better investigators and better organizers and better activists and better people for being on Lenny's team. It was better than the Giants anytime. Thank you.
Angela Davis was unable to attend tonight's gathering, but she sent the following message. For over 40 years, Leonard Weinglass was such a ubiquitous presence within radical movements' entanglements with the law that it is hard to imagine campaigns against racism, against war, against imperialism proceeding without him. When he passed away, we lost one of the world's great champions of justice and equality. We lost a robust and relentless defender of our rights to resist the effects of repression and war. I first learned of Lenny's association with radical democratic struggles when he became one of the lawyers defending the Chicago 8. I had attended a conference in Chicago shortly before the 1968 Democratic Party National Convention and had quite serendipitously run into Kathy Boudin, with whom I attended high school in New York earlier in the decade. At that time, neither of us could have predicted that Lenny, who would soon join the team to defend Tom Hayden, Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, Bobby Seale, and the other members of the Chicago 8 case, would also eventually play important roles in our own lives. While I was acquitted, Kathy served 22 years, and I know from discussions with him during that period that the passage of time in no way diminished Lenny's passionate dedication to her freedom. When I reflect on Leonard Weinglass and the vast numbers of people he defended, from Daniel Ellsberg to Mumia Abu-Jamal, and most recently the Cuban Five, what I remember most is a magnificent combination of brilliance and expertise in the law, unconditional commitment to justice, and a striking humility rare among those who have chosen his profession. He will be forever missed.
Daniel Ellsberg also could not be here tonight, but he is sending his message in the following video.
When my friend Tony Russo was brought into the indictment in the end of 1971, he brought with him a lawyer who was famous from the Chicago trial, Leonard Weinglass, and it was very clear very quickly that he'd made a tremendous addition to the team. Not only was he a warm, friendly, funny, shrewd person who was a pleasure to be with for the ensuing couple of years of our trial, but he was really the only one in the team with real trial courtroom experience. Leonard Boudin was an appellate lawyer, Charlie Nissen was a professor, and Lenny was the one who really knew his way around a courtroom, a trial courtroom, and that was tremendously valuable. But in a way that wasn't clear to even him until just recently, really. He was crucial in ending the war as soon as it did, after it was long delayed, but sooner than it would otherwise. In this way, when John Dean revealed in the spring of 1973 that his boss, Richard Nixon, had committed various criminal acts against me, such as bringing the so-called plumbers sending them into my former psychoanalyst office to get information with which to blackmail me, and had subsequently obstructed justice by bribing them into committing perjury before a grand jury and in other ways. That information would have been successfully sat on by Richard Nixon. It probably never would have come out, or not until very much later, except for the fact that it was really Nixon's obligation to send it on to us in the courtroom in Los Angeles, given that we were on trial. In fact, two of his subordinates warned him that they would have to resign if he didn't send it on, and after several weeks' delay, he did send it on, knowing that that faced him with impeachment at that point. That would not have happened if we weren't on trial then, and that in turn would not have happened without a decision by Lenny Weinglass a year earlier. In the spring of '72, we'd actually impaneled a jury after a long, tortuous effort, and had made initial motions. When we were ready to go into trial, a lot of money had already been spent. And when it turned out that we'd been overheard, that one of the trial lawyers had been overheard in a wiretap of an embassy at that point, the judge ruled that he didn't think it was relevant, didn't have to be given to us, and our rest of the team was really inclined to let that one go and to go on into trial rather than take the enormous expense of delaying matters by objecting to it. Lenny insisted very strongly and succeeded in having it referred to Justice Douglas of the Supreme Court, who did delay the trial for a matter of months, since the Supreme Court was not in session to hear it entirely at that point. And as he explained to me just about a year ago, he did that very deliberately because he didn't like the first jury we had impaneled. It had been chosen from a large panel of people, all of whom turned out to have been holders of security clearance in the past, which meant that they almost surely believed that I was guilty, even starting the process, and that they themselves couldn't keep their own clearances if they acquitted me. We used up our peremptory challenges on those people, and we were left with a jury that Lenny felt was too deferential to executive authority from their backgrounds, and he didn't like it. So he deliberately worked and successfully to delay the trial some 9 months or so. We had to impanel a whole new jury and move ahead. Given that, when Nixon's crimes came out and were revealed in the courtroom, Nixon faced impeachment, had to resign, and the war ended some 9 months later, perhaps a year and a half before it would have otherwise ended. So the effect was to save innumerable lives by that judgment. It shows what a lawyer acting for the people and against the administration can do. Not easy to imitate that particular achievement, but it was a major effect of Lenny's life when I connected the dots for him just about a year ago. Just a month before he went into the hospital, we were talking about his advice that he was going to give for the Assange defense, in this case Julian Assange, and his hope to help Bradley Manning in his defense. It was always his instinct, of course, to help people who were fighting for free expression and for freedom. And I told the defense teams in both cases they couldn't possibly have better defense counsel and advice than from my friend Lenny Weinglass.
Juan Segarra Palmer is a Puerto Rican independista. He was one of the macheteros. He was arrested in 1989, and he was defended by Len.
Good evening. If it had been up to the machinery of the state, as Lenny called it, I wouldn't be out until 2016, and I wouldn't have the privilege of being here with you and sharing my love for Lenny and seeing some of the fruits of his labor. I was held for 2.5 years without bail, and when I got out, my wife and I conceived our youngest daughter and named her Sulena in honor of Lenny. And in keeping honor to Lenny's name, she was born in prison and had her first trial at the age of 2 days old, or her first lawsuit, and won. Lenny was there when I got out in 2004 at the airport. He was there whenever I needed him during the whole time I was in prison. And my oldest son, Amilcar, loved Lenny so much that when he had his son in 2007, he decided to name him Lenny. Amilcar's wife is Jewish, so his name was Lenny Avishai, which means a gift from God. And that's truly what Lenny was for all of us. So that's why it's not unusual that you have a Puerto Rican kid living in France with the name of Lenny Avishai. During the time I was in prison, we had a really good meditation teacher. And one of the things that he told us on one occasion, he said, "How many seeds does a mango have?" One, obviously. And then the following question was, well, how many mangoes does a seed have? And Lenny was a beautiful, beautiful seed that has produced a lot of beautiful mangoes. God bless you all.
At this time, I would like to ask any of you who would like to come up to the stage who were at any time a client of Len's, someone who received his legal services, for anything that you needed help, to please come up to the stage. And we're going to make a circle here of those of us who have been helped by Len. Any of you come up. We stand here as Len's clients, free from prison because of him. We stand as individuals whom he helped using his legal skills. 2 nights ago, as I was thinking about what should we do here on the stage, I spoke with Karen Rudolph, Jimmy Simmons' partner, who asked me, what did freedom mean? What did freedom mean being inside prison? I thought for a moment, I thought, of course, about my son, Chesa, and how my love for him would help as a transcendence. But I also thought about the power of nature, how nature enabled me to not feel captive by the razor wire, by the fences, by the walls. Instead, nature moves beyond the immediate. The wind, the seasons, the light of day and the dark of night, the rain and the stars, transcended and holding on to it like a kite. I could move beyond. Len made our freedom possible, and Len found in nature a force of life and freedom as well. He loved his land, the fruit trees that he planted, reminiscent of a Russian peasant, the grapevines, the land where he spent many years on long weekends living in a teepee until he built his house on top of a mountain looking out at the water in the distance. We pass this branch from the flowering azalea plant and bush that you see in front of you as we speak our names and the work Len did to make possible freedom. My name is Kathy Boudin, and Len defended me in the case most commonly known as the Brinks.
My name is Bill Harris. Lenny defended my wife and was my co-counsel in a case in LA, and also in the Patricia Hearst case in Oakland.
My name is Daniel Gross. Lenny defended me in a case where Starbucks, as part of a relentless union-busting campaign, instigated my arrest by the NYPD, and as importantly, became one of the most important mentors to me in my life.
My name is Tom Hayden, Chicago 8.
My name is Karen Rudolph, and my son and I are Arthur Simmons, and I are here representing Jimmy Simmons, who passed away a couple weeks after Lenny. And because of Lenny, my husband spent the last 30 years of his life as a free man.
My name is Sean Hellier, and Len successfully defended me in the War Parade 18 case.
My name is Ngô Thanh Nhan. I am one of the 32 students who opposed the war in 1972. We formed the Union of Vietnamese in the US, and Len defended us, and we actually won when the war ended. Len and I joined the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility campaign in 2005. And lastly, we bring to you the warm greeting of Madame Nguyễn Thị Bình from Vietnam.
My name is Juan Segarra. Lenny defended me in the Hartford Wells Fargo case.
Linda Bakiel. Lenny helped me on a little grand jury matter I had because of my defense of freedom fighters.
Francisco Kiko Martinez. Two memories of Lenny. We survived the snowstorm of the 20th century in Colorado when we were going to visit Antonio Guerrero at Florence. And Lenny was almost a co-defendant of ours when the chief of the federal district court in Colorado placed cameras in the courtroom, and in the judge's words, to get them all. He wanted a major conspiracy case.
My name is Tommy Trantino. I was on death row with an execution date, and Len saved my life then and many times thereafter. Here I am.
My name is Junius Williams, and I was a member of the Newark Community Union Project in Newark, New Jersey, which was an SDS project. And Len was our project attorney. So he kept a number of us out of jail, and if we got in jail, he helped us get out of jail. But more importantly to me at this point, I look back at Lenny, and I'm a lawyer now, and I just like the way he practiced law. He had a house where he lived in the back, and he practiced law in the front. So when I got tired of my downtown office, I bought a house, and I practiced law in the front and lived in the back. So that when me and my dog decided to go to work, we went. Sometimes we didn't.
Well, I'm Bob Bloom, and I don't deserve to be up here just because he represented me on something very minor. But Debbie beckoned to me to come up. Here I am. But these people are wonderful and beautiful and deserve what they got when Len Weinglass, the finest attorney I've ever known.
Those standing here are only a few of Lenny's clients. Some are still incarcerated, some have passed on, and some are living far away and couldn't come. But in addition to Lenny's clients, there are so many people in prison still. And what I ask now is if everybody could stand. If you can think of someone in prison, and if you can stretch your hand out, as if you're reaching for them, your energy is coming from your hand, and we're grabbing for them. And if we can just give a shout out to the people who we're pulling towards us, to pull them towards us, towards freedom. Shout out the names of people still inside. David Gilbert. Thank you. Tomorrow, as we spread the ashes, Len's ashes on his land, we will also plant this flowering azalea bush so that each year as it flowers, we know that Len's legacy will live on. Thank
you. You know, when a team of us were up in the hospital with Lenny, Linda Bacchiel was there, Billy Bird, and those that you've heard of. We're there pretty much all of February up until March 23rd. And it truly was a winter of discontent. And to the extent, I think, that the clouds that were lowered on us have been dissipated a bit by this evening, I'm grateful for it. And I'm really grateful for what Kathy Boudin, she's making up for lost time, what Kathy's been able to do. When I was talking last week with our next speaker, who many of us consider a national treasure, I said to him, what would you like me to say by way of introduction for you? And he said, in his soft drawl, well, part of the country I come from, we say, you can tell them who I am, but don't tell them where I'm at.
We are the lucky few, those whose lives have been touched by Lenny. The word nobility comes to my mind. I don't believe in royalty, but noble principle, dedication, and modesty. I first met him on a cold December Sunday in 1969. Bill Kunstler and a couple of the defendants, I don't believe one of them was Tom, but in the Chicago 7 case came out to the house in the suburbs of Washington to ask me to be a witness in the trial. And I told them I would. I would want to. I got out there and we wasted about 2 days trying to get me on the stand, and the judge ruled that my testimony would be cumulative, which is a pretty ridiculous ruling because we'd spent a lot of time in the summer of '68 with the Civil Rights Division and Community Relations Service and other people trying to cool it in Chicago. And we thought we knew where the trouble really came from. Mayor Daley had said in that earlier summer when, after Dr. King's death, that they were going to shoot looters. We had to say, you shoot looters and you'll be prosecuted by the federal government. And that was the spirit of the times when that demonstration occurred. The trial went on, and finally there was another trial that you don't hear so much about, called the trial of the Chicago 10 for contempt of court. During the trial of the Chicago 7 trial for standing up for the United States of America. And the 10 were the 7 plus Bobby Seale, who had been separated from the case brutally, and the 2 lawyers, Len and Bill. Len was cited in 14 separate counts of contempt and sentenced on them. It was all an honor. The sentence amounted, though, however, to about 2 years and 1 year and 10 months. The first sentence was for 2 days, and the second one was for 5 years. But when Len had made his statement about before sentencing, he said nothing in his own defense. He only said that, Judge, you've accused us of disrespect. And the one thing that I had expected in coming into this trial was that after 20 weeks, you'd know my name. The judge kept calling him this, that, or the other. And it wasn't a mistake. It was taunting and about as disrespectful as you can get. And he ended a very short statement in his own defense by saying that the people who really made this vigorous defense possible are those who worked night and day for nothing outside while we were in here sporting around in the courtroom, which is Len's modesty. Not that the help wasn't essential and very, very important, but he was taking no credit for what happened. Over the years, we crossed paths many times. I didn't have the good fortune, so many did, to spend a lot of leisure time with him, but we went to the Philippines to protest an American Bar Association convention there on peace through law. We created a counter-convention called Peace Through Martial Law because it was a time of Marcos and his brutal regime. We were down in Nicaragua during the Contra fight, and Len was always relaxed, good-natured. He knew that any fool can be unhappy and nothing can make him unhappy, because he knew that he was doing what he believed in, and he knew he was doing it with important and great effect. And he carried on. We went to Tehran during the first major international meeting after the success of the revolution against 25 years of torture for a whole population under the Shah, the whole population except for the privileged rich. Just before we were to leave, there were 16 of us that planned to go, and Attorney General Ben Civiletti called my office. My wife answered the phone and said, he knew her, said, "Georgia," said, "if Ramsey and those other folks go, we're going to prosecute them." So we had a long discussion out at the airport that night. I talked past that flight. I'd made reservations for the next night for 16 people. 10 showed up. Ben was one of them. And we had some divisions among us as to whether we talk about the hostages that had been taken Thanksgiving the year before. And some thought that ought to be mentioned. Some thought that was none of our business, that solidarity was the main thing. And Ben was a conciliator that smoothed things over. And we got out of there, and they didn't prosecute us after all. He was a man of unusual wisdom, of gentleness, steel and velvet. He was hard as a rock when he had to be, and soft as drifting snow. And he was happiest and wanted to be and could be. We have a great debt to him. He is the very image of a human being struggling for peace and truth and justice on earth. And we must see that his work and his memory is never forgotten.
First, I just want to acknowledge that here in the audience, honoring Len today, is Ambassador Pedro Núñez Mosquera, Cuba's head mission and ambassador to the United Nations. Ricardo Alarcón, president of the Cuban National Assembly, and Lenny's closest associate in his effort to free the Cuban Five, could not be here, but he sent a message on the following video.
Those who are meeting now there in New York and many others here in Cuba and elsewhere were very privileged, having been close to that man that was an exceptional, dedicated human being that devoted his life to justice and to work for the benefit of others. I remember when I began to get involved in the struggle for the liberation of the Cuban Five, we met with a number of American friends trying to see what to do and how to do it. The consensus was that what they needed most was a good defense lawyer, and everybody recommended the same person, Leonard Weinglass. I remember meeting here in Havana with an Afro-American friend of mine, a lady, who, after listening to the whole story, told me, "Ricardo, what these young men need desperately is somebody who defends them, a good lawyer. In other words, they need Len." When I told her that I had already spoken with Len, she smiled. She was absolutely certain that the Five will be free and that this battle will be won. But I think that at this moment I should also make a disclosure. When I met with Len, I was hesitant because to ask a person to join a defense team of a case that was the longest in American history, with tens of thousands of documents and pages, a very complicated case in which you didn't participate, to join the team at the appellate level, at that phase, was to ask too much to any lawyer. And I asked him, and his answer couldn't be more simple. Thank you. That was what he told me. You are giving me a very big honor. I will be privileged to do that. And he became the most knowledgeable person about the case, and also the most active, tireless fighter in promoting the solidarity with this case. At this moment, I have to share with you, dear friends, my sentiments. I am asking myself the same question. We are back to square one. We need a very good defense lawyer. We need Lenny now more than any other time. That's why we will miss him forever. I thank you.
I'd like to introduce Linda Bacchial. Linda is a very fine lawyer. She co-counseled cases with Len, including the case with Kathy, and she's an equally fine poet.
Almost ready. I have everything almost ready for the spring, you said. Brush cut, brambles cleared, new trees planted. A lopsided smile flit across your silver stubble beard, a late winter field momentarily lit by a break in a fleet of migrating clouds. Special, hardy, for the cold, you whispered, enthusiasm overcoming exhaustion. What kind? I ventured, cross-examining the cross-examiner, seeking just one word at a time, measuring each breath, and willing the earth to stop turning. Walnuts. English or black? I persisted, watching on memory's shadow box the scrawny fingers of black walnut trees clawing their way into the cerulean heavens of southern New Jersey. Their meat is bitter. To get at it, you run over the fallen nuts with a truck. English, you answered, a little impatient with the obvious, swiping at an impudent halo of hair impervious to authority. English, of course. You crack them open with a simple gadget, sitting around a fire with friends. The meat is sweet, forgiving. Of course. Who would plant trees that grow wild and give nothing but trouble? St. Patrick's Day is for planting peas, I ventured, knowing that a false spring is more dangerous than a late one, and that in the region from which you spoke, every promise was false. But you had drifted off, shoved by urgent winds, into a realm we could not reach, where you still had so much to do to get ready for a spring that was almost upon us. Thank you.
Tom Hayden has known Len since he first set up a law practice in Newark in 1983. Tom was Len's client during the Chicago 7 case and a longtime and close friend.
Debbie and Kathy Boudin, for all they did during Len's final months, weeks, hours. I saw him at a place called the Village Care, I believe it is, down in Greenwich Village on around this 26th of February for several hours. I had come in I had heard from others that he had died and come back to life. I'd been actually informed that he was going to die imminently, and there he was. He had gone to death and back, and I was surprised how much life there was in this dying man. There was some color in his face. There was he had been unable to speak for the previous 3 days, I believe. I think he was saving up to have a few words with me. That's how far into the other world he had gone. And we had this great conversation with others there, and it was surreal. It was like talking to a person between life and death. He was my oldest and best friend. He would flutter between the TV, which would show the inanity of TV, and then the sudden televised spectacle of people in the streets in Egypt. And as he customarily did when he was making a point, he'd raise his finger. And I was wondering what he was going to tell me. And he told me, I don't even remember the specifics of it, but he told me exactly how many square miles there are in North Africa. This was of extreme importance, the magnitude of the Arab Revolution that was unfolding as he was passing away. He had the decency that many dying people do to think of others. And he had kind words for members of my family. I got a little hope, irrational hope, because when I mentioned my family and how much they wanted to be there, he said, yeah, bring the family, that'd be good, which made me think, and Kathy I think that somehow if he could imagine a visit, he could imagine a future. It might be days, it might be weeks, but he was still able to imagine something happening in the future. I asked him if he wanted any spiritual advice. He said a rabbi had been by, and he said no to the rabbi's offer of final consolation. I want to say that Lenny taught me how good a good Jew can be. But he didn't have time for the rabbi at that moment. But he said that he was reading Tolstoy, War and Peace, the great story of how war comes to nothing, and Tolstoy is becoming a kind of a Christian humanist by the end, trying to make sense of life and death. And Len said, I'm on page 150. Then he said, it's all there. So I recommend that you go home tonight and read at least the first 150 pages of War and Peace. What are we to make of this guy? I just want to add a few thoughts to what's been said. He definitely was a lawyer to the last. He was not only passionately dedicated to the Cuban Five, he had time to talk with me constantly at great length about the WikiLeaks case, and I'm so glad to see Michael Ratner here, who was partnering with him on that. We had a dinner together not long ago to explore that case. I had a case in Los Angeles involving conspiracy charges against a former gang member who turned into a community peacemaker, Alex Sanchez, and all the way to the end, Len was advising me on the phone about federal law, RICO cases, the difficulty of putting up a defense for an ex-gang member. I wanted to fly out and talk to Alex if he could. So he was really involved in as many battles to the very end, and I can only imagine what else. I met him in 1964. I was looking for a lawyer because I was a community organizer with Junius in the Newark Community Union Project, and a lot of renters were being evicted. And I happened to give a talk to a group of Vista volunteers, I think they were called, and this young woman came up to me and said, "I've got a friend that I want you to meet. Maybe he can help with your case." And so she introduced me to Len in '64, and we became fast friends, friends of a lifetime. We were roommates during the entire Chicago 8 trial and the entire Pentagon Papers trial. He was a working, practicing lawyer. I don't know how else, everybody has said, he may have been the best trial lawyer in the courtroom of anyone in our lifetime. He certainly was the best lawyer I've ever seen in a trial, and I saw him on several occasions, and I have been in a lot of trials. I know what I'm talking about. During the, I'll give you an example. During the Chicago case, we put on 104 witnesses, and the judge wouldn't allow but a certain number of lawyers to be at the table. So I became a sort of additional lawyer. I was a defendant lawyer, and living in the same apartment with Len, every night, Ann Freunds, John Freunds, Bob Lamb, all these people were up all night trying to construct the defense. We wanted to put the government on trial as well as defend ourselves individually. And it required coordinated 104 testimonies, people driving in, flying in from all over the country, and they had to be on time, they had to be ready, they had to be prepared, and Len taught us how to prepare witnesses and prepare questions for cross-examination, because he was limited in how many lawyers could be at the table. And I think that he did a great job, and the evidence of that would be this, that it came time to decide who among the defendants was clean enough to testify. And I thought that Abby had to go up on the stand, as well as Rennie. One yippie, one anti-war, and the rest of us should sit down and be quiet. They were the presentables. And Abby didn't want to do it. Abby was freaking out and getting ill. It was all psychological, because what we were facing was very, very serious stuff. And Abby was inclined at the beginning to have Bill Kunstler as the attorney, because Bill and Abby were consistent in the belief that you had to act out somewhat dramatically, theatrically, for the television audience, for the larger audience, what the case was about. But when it came to time to testify, no disrespect to Bill by any means, Abby said, "Len, I can't do this without you." And so they switched lawyers. And for days and nights after these courtroom appearances, they'd go up on the roof of Schroeder and Mary Bolton's penthouse in the Village and go through the testimony, all of Abby's life, everything that Abby had ever said. And Abby was the actor, and he was a brilliant actor. The first line is immortal. I'm My name is Abby. I'm an orphan of America. But Len was the author, director, and producer. And he understood that it all had to be channeled through Abby. Abby was on the stand, and Abby did brilliantly. But it was that combination of a lawyer who had the sensitivity and the belief and the solidarity with the client, and the ability to tease out of Abby everything that Abby had ever said in whatever state of consciousness Abby was in. Believe me, that's important. You're going up for a cross-examination, and you don't know the state of mind of your own defendant. But it was a great turning point in the trial. That's an example, and I won't give others, but it's an example of Len at his courtroom best. Now, I want to rise in defense of Leonard Weinglass for the first and last time. He would always button his coat before he said this. I think we have to rescue Len's reputation from those who would misunderstand it. I'm speaking of the young filmmaker wannabe who did the Chicago 10 movie, which turned Len into a graphic character, a cartoon. Never met Len, never talked to him. And Len is depicted in the movie as a cartoon character who has long hair and is dressed in a purple suit. And in some of the visuals that go with the drawings show Len wearing a crazy straw hat. That wasn't Len, and Len was worried. He had a tiny vanity about his appearance, and certainly his reputation, and he was concerned that this made him seem like one of the yippies or some kind of offbeat countercultural lawyer wearing this weird straw hat. And he told me that. So I went to talk to the producer director, and I said, "You have Weinglass completely wrong." And he said, based on the archival film that they had, he chose the footage that was the most striking, that did make Len look a little on the zany side of sanity. And he had no idea, he had no idea how wrong that version of Len was. There's a deeper point here, which is if you're a defense lawyer, you're going to defend people who have done some crazy things from time to time, some bad things, forgivable things. But you're going to become associated as a defense lawyer with your defendants. So over a long and successful career of defending unpopular clients, you are going to be associated in the public mind and in the media mind with all of those clients. Not as a lawyer, but some person who apparently believes in all the things these people did. And it's quite a reputation to handle, to be described that way. So I want to just end by saying something about why I think Len did this. It was a lesson for me. He, as I said, he was I think, a Jewish humanist. He had a core set of beliefs, and maybe a mother over his shoulder that he was worried about not letting down. I don't know. We talked about this, but I'm going too far into the intimate. But he had this core humanism, and it's so fitting that we're in the ethical culture society because that would be his values. But it was more than values. He preceded the 60s. He preceded the 60s. He preceded me by 7 or 8 years, and he He was a judge adjutant general. He was a Yale Law School graduate. He was a professional at his practice who was looking for a calling. People like myself were movement activists who had a calling, but we had no time to become professionals. That would come later. But at the time, it was a kind of a perfect match. And I think that in this age when trial lawyers, defense lawyers, criminal defense lawyers are always categorized as an interest group, just an interest group, even demonized by the Republicans and by the corporate attorneys as some lesser breed of lawyer who is constantly going around advocating for insane causes and people that ought to stay in jail. I have to ask myself why Len was drawn to being a criminal defense attorney. Some think that he was drawn into it by those of us in the 60s, but I remember when I first met him, he was already defending Tom Trentino, who was here earlier, on a capital case. And that was a hard case. And Lenny was going around selling Trentino's paintings to make money, pocket money, for his client's defense. So Lenny already had a catcher-in-the-rye instinct in his personality. He was drawn to try to help people who were going off the cliff. And I looked on the plane today at the Bill of Rights. And I saw in it the foundation of what a Leonard Weinglass may have been all about. He may have taken it so seriously that it was a personal ethos. The Constitution establishes the state. The Bill of Rights was fought for by social movements, by local activists who refused to join the state unless certain rights were guaranteed. And sometimes people forget that the Bill of Rights was not about your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's somewhere else in the document. But again and again, what comes across is the apprehension that ordinary people had of great powers, the state, the police. The first article, assembly, petition, speech, religion. The second article, the right to bear arms. That might be controversial here tonight, but does it not underlie the rationale for the Black Panther Party or the Weather Underground? A fear so great that the state would return in a new form of tyranny that people had to have the right to bear arms. Searches and seizures, the Fourth Amendment. Fifth Amendment, protection against self-incrimination. Sixth Amendment, the rights of the accused, the right to have a lawyer. Seventh Amendment, the right to have a jury. Eighth, ninth, rights that are retained by the people, which became the privacy provisions. 13th, anti-slavery. 14th, citizenship and due process. 15th, voting rights. 24th, ban on the poll taxes. These are amendments that show the need for a Len Weinglass because they have to do with the protection of the less powerful against the threat that the powerful will continually exceed the bounds of their authority and become oppressors. And if you see it this way, if you see Len in this context, not just the Len that is depicted in the Foolish movie, or the Len that is depicted in the foolish media accounts and the obituaries and all that. What I took away from it by working with him for many, many years, I've known him since '64, roomed with him twice, was that he had this passion to defend people against the bullying powers, whether they were the state, the intelligence agencies, the corporations, whomever. And because he had this professionalism about him, combined with the passion of an activist, he was our last best hope. He was always looking for the argument that would convince the jury to nullify the case, or convince one juror, one, to refuse to convict, or convince the majority to tip the minority into a unanimous verdict, as in the Amy Carter, Abby Hoffman case that he mentioned. And with the appellate cases, while he advised us in his darkest moments that we would do 10 years for Chicago and he'd get us out in 7. And we said, no, we can't do that. We're not going to do that. Come up with another plan. The plan was, if you couldn't get a hung jury, you had to lay the foundation, as was said earlier, you had to lay the foundation for the appeal. You had to have a calculated understanding of who was on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, what their record was, what they were concerned about, and you had to look beyond that to the U.S. Supreme Court, while at the same time you were taking care of your clients and keeping an eye on the daily coverage. I learned the same lesson many years later in a very deep way when I had to run for office 11 times, 12 times. I learned what it's like to concentrate on tipping the potential supporter into a real supporter, getting the undecided voter to come your way, trying to avoid pushing the undecided voter in the other direction. It's a matter of craftsmanship. It's a state of mind. It's a kind of discipline that you begin to learn, but it's the last best hope, it seems to me, in this kind of society. The voters and the jurors, wherever the ordinary people have some right of speech to be at the table in the process, is where you have to go to frustrate the powerful and turn back the worst and make opportunity possible for people who have less. So that's what I think that he did, and the lesson that I take with me. He was my legal guardian. He's the legal guardian of so many more. I don't know how to feel about this question of whether he's replaceable. Everybody's replaceable. Better people come along because they stand on the shoulders of those who came before. But it's also true in life and in the universe itself that every single living entity is unique, and Len was really as unique as it gets.
We've really come to the end, and in a way it's hard to end just because there's something about coming to this point at the end of a memorial for someone that you feel like as long as you're building towards a memorial, you're holding on to a person in a certain way. So I find it hard to end, but I also know it's time to end. I want to thank some people came here from very far away, really at the last minute, on the invitation to be part of the defendant's circle. Kiko Martinez came, Bill Harris, Karen Rudolph and her son representing Jimmy, Tom, other people, Juan Segar Palma, Linda, just thanking people for coming as far as they did. And I want to end with a couple of lines from W.H. Auden. also paraphrased to fit this occasion. Earth, receive an honored guest, Leonard Weinglass, laid to rest. Thank you very much.